My boss, Jim Wright, told me to do a quick tour of the hotel so I could see how extensive the electrical upgrades would need to be. Meanwhile, he was meeting with the hotel owners in their office. I strolled across the pool area, cleverly not letting anyone know I was trying my damnedest to take in all the good looks I possibly could. That was when I saw a 40-something red-headed fox chatting with a man, obviously several years younger than she. They had pulled their lounge chairs together, and the man had his hand on her left knee. In so doing, his elbow was in constant contact with the lady's generously formed left chest. I immediately hurried away from the pool area, relaxing only when I was well out of sight of the pool. I mulled over my options for all of 20 seconds. I instinctively knew what I had to do, but briefly considered the ramifications. I saw only one honorable course of action. I took out my cell phone and texted a short message to my boss. I carefully made my way back to the pool area, remaining as inconspicuous as possible. I stood in the shade of an overhead balcony with my phone's camera function displayed. I counted slowly to 25 and began filming the couple I had noticed earlier. The woman was now lying on her lounge chair with her top undone as the man slowly applied sunscreen to her back, paying particular attention to her impressive side chest area that was forced out from under her torso and was on a spectacular display. I had only been videoing for a few seconds when an obviously enraged man rushed up to the couple. He grabbed a handful of the lotion applier's hair and ruthlessly jerked his head back. Doing so exposed the man's chin and throat. I easily heard the whack as the angry man's fist met Romeo's throat. It was followed immediately by a second blow, this time to the man's chin. The man who had been attending to the voluptuous redhead a few short seconds ago was now lying on the pool's apron, making horrible retching sounds as blood oozed from his mouth and onto the pool deck. It had all happened so fast that the woman barely had time to look back to see the very angry man rubbing his fist as he stood over her. That lasted a few seconds before he grabbed her red tresses. "Jim!" was all she managed to blurt before he pulled her to her feet by the hair on her head. I was still recording, so I captured her as the man swung her around to face him. "You cheating woman!" was all he managed as he glared at his wife's panic-stricken face. I briefly worried that he was going to strike her, but luckily, he reined in his temper and simply pushed her backward into the pool. He proceeded to throw a few chairs and plastic tables across the deck before seeing me standing off to the side. He slumped noticeably before lumbering my way. "Mike, get me to the truck before I wind up in jail," was all he managed as tears began streaking down his cheeks. I led Jim to the parking lot and directed him into the company truck. By this time, he was an actual zombie, showing little emotion and staring straight ahead as I drove to the interstate. The 2-hour ride home was eerily silent, except for the occasional guttural sound emanating from Jim's throat. I parked in his driveway and walked him into the house. Jim sat at the kitchen table as I pulled 2 beers from the refrigerator. I placed one in front of him and popped the other open for myself. I dropped into a chair across from him. His unwavering stare made me more than a little uncomfortable. Finally, I looked him in the eyes for several seconds before asking, "Did we get the contract?" Jim blinked at my question before suddenly breaking into gales of laughter. "You dumb," was all he muttered as he opened his beer and took a long pull. My question may have been stupid, but it broke Jim out of his trance. "That lying, cheating woman told me she was going to spend a few days with her mother at her parents' lake cabin. She left yesterday morning. She's probably been with that damned Harris since yesterday afternoon. Hell. I called her mom's cabin this morning and asked to speak to Callie. Her mom told me she was in the shower, but she'd have her call me in a few minutes. Callie called me about 10 minutes later. If she was in her mother's bathroom at the lake at 10 o'clock this morning, there's no way in hell she could have driven to the Timberbrook by the time you found her with that jerk Harris." Which would indicate her mother was covering for her, I reasoned. "That means that her mother knew what the hell Callie was doing and covered for her." Jim reiterated my sentiments. "Hell, she's been visiting her mother at the cabin every summer since we've been married. Now I have to wonder how long this stuff has been going on and if that jerk was the first or just one of many. Jim had a good point, and I considered it from every possible angle as I drove home. It seemed possible, and even likely, that Jim's wife was aided and abetted in her cheating by her own mother. Could it be an inherited trait, or simply some sort of weakness that has been nurtured for generations? When I pulled into my driveway, I saw my mother-in-law's car. I didn't feel like listening to her nonsense, so I parked and walked around to the back door, knowing my wife, Tracy, would be sitting at the kitchen table drinking wine with her mother. I was correct, as usual. The only thing I hadn't expected was the volume of the conversation. Well, to be honest, the volume and the content were both a bit of a shock. "Holy hell, Mom!" Tracy practically yelled at her mother. "You know how Dad hates Jerk. What in hell were you thinking?" I couldn't help but feel some pride in Tracy's indignation over her mother's actions. She and I had pledged to remain faithful throughout our married lives. Tracy and I definitely saw eye to eye on that point. "Please don't refer to Bentley as Jerk. That was an unfortunate accident. Besides, he's still able to perform quite well," Callie insisted. "That's hardly the point here," Tracy replied. "You were out in broad daylight with a man other than Dad and only about 2 hours from home. I've warned you about letting your guard down, but you did it anyway. I thought we were far enough away from home to be safe. I don't know why your father was there or how he found us by the pool. He never goes to hotels and certainly not to their pools." "Do you think he's cheating on me?" Callie answered. "No, I don't," Tracy responded. "Dad adores you. He'd never cheat, and I'm sure he had no any idea that you'd put the horns on him. That's why his reaction was so violent. He must have been shocked to see Jerk rubbing lotion on you." "Bentley was only rubbing lotion on the sides of the chest," Callie stated. "He was a perfect gentleman." "I'm sure he was. Dad throat punched him and then broke his jaw for no good reason. How are you going to handle this, Mom? It sounds like Dad is really pissed," Tracy asked. "I'd like to stay with you for a few days until your father calms down if you don't mind. You know how Jim adores me. He'll get over this little mistake." "Maybe, as long as he doesn't find out about any of your other mistakes," Tracy suggested. "You know that they wouldn't go over well." Callie had made other mistakes, as Tracy called them. My wife knew about them? She didn't seem very surprised that her mom had been with Jerk. This information was disturbing. Not wanting them to know I was in the house and overhearing their conversation, I went quietly out the back door and around to the front. Both mother and daughter stopped speaking as I opened the door. I nodded to the now silent duo as I moved to the refrigerator and took out a beer. It occurred to me that they had no idea how much I knew about the day's activities and were waiting for me to give some indication of my knowledge. I turned and went upstairs to take a shower. They had to be wondering how much I knew, how I would react, what I would say, and who I would tell. I decided to keep them guessing. The entire situation was distasteful as hell, and Tracy's role in it was disturbing, to say the least. It boggled my mind that Tracy apparently knew her mom cheated around, yet never mentioned it to her father, or me. Keeping a secret like that was the same as lying as far as I was concerned. I had just finished putting on some fresh clothes when Tracy came into the bedroom. "Mom and Dad had a little argument today. Mom wants to stay with us for a few days until they can work out their disagreement. I told her she could. I hope you don't mind," said Tracy. "What kind of husband would I be if I objected to my wife's mother staying a few days?" I asked rhetorically. "Your parents deserve special consideration. Look how good your dad has been to me. He's really a great guy," I replied. Tracy seemed to study my face for any clues about my feelings. When I mentioned her father, she seemed to flinch a little, but that could have been my imagination. "That's one of the reasons I love you so much, Mike. You always treat me and my family like we're special," Tracy replied. "I've been working with your father for 5 years. I knew him before I met you, and he is special. He gave me my first real job. He's a good boss, a great father-in-law, and the best dad a girl could ever have." For some reason, My praise of her father didn't seem to please Tracy as much as it should have. I never noticed it before, but it now appeared to me that Tracy carried some feelings of guilt about her mother's extramarital escapades. Had I just been oblivious before this? Callie spent half the dinner asking me questions about work. She wanted to know what projects we had going, what we were bidding on, and where I had been working that day. It was apparent she was fishing to find out how much I knew and how Jim came to be at the same hotel where she had been getting a jerk the previous evening. I avoided any mention of Jim being asked to bid on an upgrade at Hotel Fornication or my part in the swimming pool denouement. I had decided that my wife and her mother weren't the only people who could have secrets. After dinner, I announced I was going to mow the lawn. Because my suspicions were dominating my thoughts, I carefully left my phone in record mode behind a banana on the kitchen counter, well away from the dishwasher. It was getting dark when I finished putting the mower away. Both women were watching Survivor on the TV in the living room. I pocketed my phone and bid them good night before going upstairs to the master bedroom. I listened to the recorded conversation my wife had with her mother after I left the house. It was eye-opening, to put it mildly. The two women plotted how to gain Jim's forgiveness. They kicked around a few ideas, but it mostly boiled down to Callie loving Jim stupid for as long as it took for him to totally forgive and trust his wayward wife. My wife helpfully suggested that Callie increase the number of love she gave Jim and let him have intimacy now and then. Callie was not keen on that option. "Who knew Jerk is big in that department?" Tracy joked. "To be honest, I had heard some rumors," Callie revealed. "Mom heard Mary Chase telling Sue Land about how big Bentley was, and she mentioned it to me." "Grandma told you Jerk had a big tool? I'm surprised she didn't try it on for size when Grandpa went on one of his golf trips. You're waggling your eyes. Don't tell me the Jerk had tried Grandmother. She's like 62 or something," Tracy stated in obvious amazement. "It was a couple of years ago, and I hope to look as good as Mom when I'm her age," Callie stated. "It really excites Bentley to brag about how he slept with a mother and daughter combination. He even wanted me to ask if he could go for the hat trick with you. Not many men get 3 generations in a family," Callie answered. "Are you kidding me? He's almost as old as Dad," Tracy pointed out. "I can't even imagine being with him. How big is he anyway?" "Let's just say you wouldn't be disappointed," Callie replied as if she was recommending a good hairdresser. "Just make sure I'm not bouncing a little Bentley grandkid on my knee," Callie answered. "I've never cheated on Mike, and I certainly wouldn't start with that Jerk," Tracy declared. "I want Mike to father any kids we have. That's one thing I'll make sure of. I love the guy." "I love your father, too. That's what makes this all so hard. I don't want a divorce," Callie insisted. "It's just that he works so many hours and comes home tired a lot. We've been lucky to have intimacy a couple of times a week. That's why I needed Bentley." "Really, Mom? What about George Marsh and Jeff Stevens, and God only knows who else?" Tracy asked. "I don't like the way this conversation is headed. Let's go watch Survivor. I think that Italian woman is going to be voted off this week," Callie stated in an obvious effort to change the subject. I saved the conversation to a flash drive and went to bed, knowing I would be getting very little sleep that night. I had a lot to think about. Work the next day was painful. Jim was a mess as he gave out work assignments to start the day. There were 5 of us working for Wrights Electric, and we exchanged glances as Jim stumbled through his directives. As was the norm, Jim and I worked together on our current project, so he climbed into the passenger seat of the company truck. We were wiring a house under construction, so we were able to talk freely without fear of anyone listening in. Once Jim began telling me about his situation, he continued all morning. I guess it was cathartic for him, but it served to jumble my mental state even more. I was having a difficult time reconciling what I had heard from my wife and her mother with the future I had envisioned. Would Tracy eventually become a wandering wife like her mother and apparently her grandmother? Would I have enough influence in her life to keep her faithful? Was it worth the risk of a failed marriage or living life as a c***? "Callie called me this morning," Jim began. She told me she wanted to apologize for the impression she may have given me that she was cheating with Bentley. She calls the jerk Bentley. She said it was the only time she ever cheated or even came close. He had been chasing her for months, and she finally succumbed to his charm. I asked her how long her mother has been covering for her affairs, and she began stuttering. It never occurred to her that it was obvious to me that her mother was lying about her whereabouts. We exchanged a few unpleasant words and I hung up. I didn't know if I should tell Jim the information I had gleaned from my eavesdropping. If he decided to reconcile, it would simply make matters worse. I decided to not make a decision, but I did it in a decisive manner. Jim, you need to take your time and find out what's really going on. It could be that was the first time or possibly not. I suggest you mull the situation over and consider all the ramifications of your decision, whether you keep Callie or toss her to the curb. I feel bad for you, Mike. You're married to my daughter but work with me, so you're caught in the middle of this mess. I feel like I wasted 25 years of my life. If it weren't for having Tracy, I'd say my married life was a meaningless sham. Having a wonderful daughter and dependable son-in-law is the only saving grace, Jim answered. I was still undecided about my future course of action when I arrived home that evening. As soon as I entered the kitchen, Tracy and her mother were all over me. Dad told Mom that you were the one who told him that Mom was at the pool with Bentley, stated Tracy with more than a little ire. What kind of jerk tries to destroy his wife's parents' marriage? Really? What would you suggest I should have done? I asked more calmly than I felt. You could have told me Jim was nearby and to get the hell out of the pool area, Callie chipped in. That would have been the gentlemanly thing to do. I was afraid you'd lose the pleasure of jerk massaging you in public. I was only thinking of you, although those exposed body of yours were distracting as hell, I retorted. It isn't my fault you and your mother were lying to Jim. You heard about Grandma lying to Jim? Tracy asked. This just keeps getting worse and worse. You've got no idea, I stated. You knew about your mother and grandmother being round-heeled cheating women, yet you lied to help them maintain that status. Now you're all angry at me because your mother was goddamn dumb enough to let a low-life bastard massage her in public, like somehow it's my fault. I'll stick with my decision, to be honest, and up front with Jim while you two try to justify the things you've been pulling on your father and grandfather all these years. I could see the worry in Tracy's face as she considered my words. I've never cheated on you and I never would. I'm not like Mom and Grandma. I tried to help them keep their nasty secrets, but I hated it. I kept telling them to end their affairs and be faithful to their husbands. You did? Callie asked before Tracy could give her a death stare. She did, Callie suddenly agreed as understanding of Tracy's plight swept over her. She said she'd never cheat on you and insisted Mom and I start towing the line, fidelity-wise. I was wrong to let Bentley charm me, but it'll never happen again. I've learned my lesson. I swear. Did George Marsh and Jeff Stevens are big too, or were just extremely persuasive? I blurted before I could control my mouth. Tracy, did you tell Mike about George and Jeff? Did you turn on me to save your own back? Demanded Callie. How could Mike know about them if you didn't tell him? Oh no, wailed Callie. Did you tell Jim about George and Jeff? What about Bill Simons? Does Jim know about him too? Not yet, I replied with a smile. The next day at work was interesting because of all the life-changing decisions. I told Jim everything I had overheard his wife and daughter discuss. He was mad as hell, then incredibly depressed. I don't see that I have any choice, Mike. I'm going to contact a lawyer and get a divorce. Don't try to talk me out of it. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied somberly. I was thinking we could use the same lawyer and maybe get a better rate. But Tracy said she's never cheated on you, Jim argued. There's no reason for you to divorce Tracy. She loves you. I know she does. I know Callie loves you, yet I wouldn't try to talk you out of a divorce. You're the one who helped me make up my mind, Jim. If I didn't have the benefit of your wisdom and experience, I might be tempted to stay with Tracy. You told me how you felt like you had wasted 25 years by being married to a cheater. I don't want to be in a position to say the same thing in 23 years. I have no trust left for your daughter. I'd be spending every day worrying that she was out looking for a better guy. I know damn well Tracy would insist on letting Callie and Callie's mother see our kids and influence their life. Leaving Tracy alone with my daughters would cause me concern, but allowing your wife and her mother to even speak to them scares me to death, I admitted. You can see why I can't continue down that road, can't you? 4 years later, I decided to take my wife, Amber, out on our second anniversary. Our daughter, Megan, was 6 months old, and Amber's parents were more than happy to keep her for the night. Since it was our anniversary, I splurged for a room at a Ritz, which was a drive of almost 100 miles. I had dinner reservations and looked forward to showing my wife how much her love meant to me. I had requested a secluded table and was pleased when we were shown to a rather dark corner of the dining room. After ordering our meals and exchanging some banter, Amber suddenly sat up straighter and stared at the entrance. "Isn't that your ex-wife?" she asked. I remember she was 2 years ahead of me in school and looked like a fashion model. She's still beautiful. I heard she remarried, but I've never seen her husband. He looks like he's quite a bit older than she is. Actually, he's the same age as Tracy, I answered as I turned to see my ex-wife being seated across the room. "Well, he's had a hard life then. He looks old enough to be her father," Amber observed. "That's not her husband. That guy only has one ball," I replied with a sigh. "I made the right decision 4 years ago. Being with you and seeing Tracy now fills me with relief and joy." "What does her husband look like?" Amber asked, now that her curiosity was piqued. "He looks just like the guy coming through the door with the baseball bat in his hand," I responded as I silently thanked my lucky stars. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.